Welcome back in, Clemson Tiger fans, to another edition of TigerNet Talk, broadcasting live here on the front page of TigerNet throughout the summers, Wednesday evenings at 10 p.m. Glad to have you with us, and I appreciate you just spending a little time with us here. We don't go an hour long. We try to stay a little short of an hour. Sometimes I say we're going to go 30 minutes, and you guys get me rolling, and I can't stop talking, and we end up going 55 minutes, but we do what we can. We have a plan. But fortunately, when we have to go further, we can. We're not constrained to the time frames of radio like we are with maybe our other show, Clemson Hotline, which I hope you'll tune in for. That's starting back up in a couple of weeks as the college football season is rapidly closing in on us. I know everybody's excited about the Tigers getting out there on the field, getting practice started, and having the football season be right around the corner. I don't know about you guys, but it's almost time to start breaking out the tailgate. You know, you got to get your dish set up. You got to make sure that everything's working properly. There's nothing like having a big event going on over in Atlanta. You're going to set things up, and you forgot the propane. You forgot the satellite cord, the power cord to the dish. Those are the key things that you've got to start focusing on as a fan at this point. Never mind what you got to worry about as far as the players go in their development, but you got to start worrying about those little things. You know, are you going to bring chicken wings to the first game, or is it going to be a pork tenderloin? Those are the things you got to start concerning yourself with. Hashtag TN Talk is the way to get to us here on Twitter. That's hashtag TN Talk. You can give us a call anytime during the show, 803-450-0086. The number on the screen below me works as well if you're watching the program live on Vocal. And I would encourage you all to check us out on VOKLE.com. That's Vocal.com. We're the third-ranked broadcaster on Vocal, thanks to you guys. And we're continuing to try and climb up that ladder a little bit each week with this program. And hopefully, once we start Clemson Hotline back up, I'm going to talk to the guys over at TigerNet and see if we can't get that show on the front page as well to get a little bit more exposure for it, too. That's, of course, my weekly radio show that is broadcast around the state of South Carolina. And you can also call the number on the bottom of the screen if you don't want to call 803-450-0086. Either way, it comes into the studio. We'll punch it through. We'll take your thoughts, questions, whatever you have to say. Now, on last week's program, we covered the Coastal Division of the Atlantic Coast Conference, and it was our plan to come into this week's program with the Atlantic Division laid out for you. Now, in retrospect, when I look back at the way we did the Coastal Division, I thought it was a pretty good program. I didn't listen to the whole thing back over, just some parts that I thought maybe I might enjoy myself. If that, listening to yourself is odd enough, but every once in a while you go, you know what, did I make my point there like I wanted to? So I went back and listened to some of it. But the thing I noticed is, in hindsight, I should have given you the worst teams in the league first and worked my way up towards who I thought was going to win the Coastal Division. I mean, there was nothing like going into that final segment of the show knowing that I was going to be talking about Virginia and Duke. I mean, that's a power segment right there. So I'm going to do the Atlantic Division a little bit differently. I'm going to start it at the bottom of the Atlantic Division, like most normal sports hosts would do, and work my way up. Now, if you are a big fan of the program, you probably know how we've advanced throughout the years. Listen, go back to the archives, find TigerNet Talk Episode 1. It sounds like a caveman doing the broadcast. We've stepped up the game throughout the years, through the 5-6 years that you've allowed us to do that. And we've got a number of new sponsors coming on board. I'm excited about having them on board. In a couple of weeks, we're going to start playing those new ads. And I really appreciate everybody's support. Got a couple of guys out and about right now. If they stop by your business, please consider supporting us. I think we have a great program. We're a Clemson-based program. We are, I think, fair. And I think we really do give you a good product each week. So I hope that you'll support us if we do stop by your business. Now, as for that, ClemsonPodcast.com has always been the home of this show and Clemson Hotline, and also TigerNet.com. But I've recently purchased ClemsonSportsTalk.com. That website is not up completely. We're still working on it. We're going to revamp everything. We're going to bring it all back, rebranding a little bit. You don't know how many times I went to the tailgate and would give somebody a card, see somebody walking into the stadium, and they'd say, well, I don't even know how to podcast. I don't even really get it. We've taken it to a new dimension here on the program. The way we do it is a little bit different. And I think the better relationship or the better way to explain what we do, ClemsonSportsTalk.com. Everything's going to be similar, but I think the feeling that people will get when they hear what we're doing will resonate a little bit easier. And plus, saying podcasts, that S at the end is always difficult when you're trying to do it for people. But we'll continue now. We'll go ahead and start our show off with the Atlantic Division and where we think the teams will wind up at the end of the season. And the Atlantic Division was a little bit interesting for me, for one thing, because, of course, our Clemson Tigers are in the mix. But after Clemson and Florida State and some other ball clubs, maybe even in NC State, this division gets a little bit dicey for me. It gets a little bit difficult to really put your finger on and feel comfortable about where these teams are going to finish up. I think we clearly have a top three, and then we've got a bottom half of that league as well. But my initial reaction was to go with Boston College at the bottom of this league this season in the Atlantic Division. Now, Coach Frank Spaziani is obviously on the hot seat. If he finishes at the bottom of the league, and I think he's a nice guy, but he just hasn't gotten the job done at Boston College. If he finishes at the bottom of the league this year, you can bet that Spaziani is going to be out at Boston College. They went 4-8 last season, 3-5 in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and it was their first losing season since 1998. And if you go back, another coach in this division, Tom O'Brien, who was at Boston College, did a wonderful job as Boston College came into the ACC. And I think that, Frank Spaziani, they had Jeff Jagodzinski there. It just didn't flow very well to get to Spaziani. Kind of was thrown into the fire and just has not been able to get the guys in there they need to be a successful ball club. Now, he's looking to change things up a little bit. He's got a new offensive coordinator, Doug Martin, who comes over from Kent State. He's known to be a quarterback guru. The question becomes, can he take a guy like Chase Redding and make him into the type player that Spaziani is going to need him to be for this team to get out of the basement? In my book right now, I just don't see it, to be honest with you. I know that Chase Redding has the ability to get there, but unfortunately, in this league this season, with games against Miami, they have a game against Clemson, at FSU, at Georgia Tech. They play Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, and NC State. You could argue that Boston College has the toughest draw in the entire Atlantic Coast Conference when you look at their schedule. And I think that's the reason when I look there, I said, man, they're probably going to be at the bottom. Add to that Montel Harris, the running back from that ball club, who's now off of that team because of some issues. He's been dismissed. He was going to be potentially the Atlantic Coast Conference's all-time career rushing leader. He now goes to Temple. And so it's going to be, issues there at the running back position. At the wide receiver spot, Colin Lamar Jr. is one of my favorites in the ACC. Just a couple of years ago, this kid came on strong. It's really going to be intriguing to see how he goes. They do have 4 of their 5 starters back on the offensive line, but all in all, offensively, it's a big question mark for me right now, even with a new offensive coordinator on board. And if that's the case in this league, there are a couple of other good defenses, especially in the Atlantic Division, that are going to cause a whole lot of trouble. I see we've got Rand and Sophie checking in with us here in the chat room. Appreciate them being a part of the show. That's the great thing about participating with us here live on Vocal, is that you can come in and chat with us right there, and we will recognize you. You can also submit your own text questions in Vocal, which we'd love to have you a part of the program as well. Also, on the defensive side of the ball, to kind of wrap things up, Luke Cluckley was an unbelievable player last year for Boston College. He's since gone to the NFL. Arguably, he may have been the best player in school history there on the defensive side of the ball. So you've got another question mark there. This is a team that's going to finish, in my mind, at the bottom of the conference. But it's going to be close, because the team that's going to finish right above them, I think, Randy Edsall and the Maryland Terrapins. And Randy Edsall's also hired a couple of new coordinators. New offensive coordinator, Mike Loxley. He was the head coach at New Mexico. He was an assistant coach from, I believe, 1997 to 2002 at Maryland. And on defense, they've got Brian Stewart, who has had some experience in the NFL. He was with the Cowboys, formerly with the Cowboys. They have a pretty favorable schedule, though, I think. The problem is all of their tough games, really, outside of the Florida State game, are on the road. They go to West Virginia. That's out of conference play, obviously, and then at Clemson and at NC State. And those games, NC State, FSU, and Clemson, for Maryland are all in November. So if Maryland can get off to a good start, then perhaps they'll have a chance to maybe be in the mix a little bit near the end of the season. However, I've got a feeling that it won't go that well, and some of those other games that I don't label as tough games might be a little bit more difficult for the Terrapins. Of course, C.J. Brown has an unbelievable quarterback, especially with his legs. Athletically, this kid is a legitimate ball player. They, of course, lost Danny O'Brien, who was the quarterback there last season for part of the year. He and C.J. Brown, they went in and out. Danny O'Brien, oddly enough, transfers to where? Wisconsin, home of former ACC quarterbacks. A little bit strange there when you think about Russell Wilson going from NC State last season, and now O'Brien transfers after graduating and will get to play at Wisconsin. And if you remember Danny O'Brien, O'Brien was the Atlantic Coast Conference Rookie of the Year back in 2010. So he's gone. There's not a whole lot of depth behind Brown. He's a threat to run the ball, but he's had shoulder injuries in the past. Will those things pop their evil head up? I mean, that's going to be a big question. I think this Maryland team goes as C.J. Brown goes. On the defensive side of the ball, they've got a great defensive tackle, or they had a great defensive tackle, Joe Valeno, who he plays. I mean, he was let me get this out, was a second team All-American last season. Joe Valeno is an unbelievable player for that ball club. Plays smart. He's got great pad level. He's intense. The guy could move outside to the defensive end spot they need him to. Brian Stewart, as I mentioned, came from the NFL. The NFL guys, they like that 3-4 defense. Maybe he ends up sliding to the outside and plays a little bit of the defensive end for Maryland. It's definitely a package that puts him in a position where a guy who typically plays on the inside can maybe be a little bit more disruptive on the outside for this ball club. At linebacker, they've got two good inside linebackers with L.A. Gore and Demetrius Hartsville, and on the outside linebackers, Alex Twine and Darren Drakeford. Those two guys tied to lead the Atlantic Coast Conference in forced fumbles last season. Lots of depth. Again, injuries with all of these teams as we kind of go through this. That's going to be the one common theme. I think when you look at the Atlantic Coast Conference and a lot of these teams, you do have some very good players on a lot of these ball clubs at that first level. But when you start talking depth of these teams and getting further and further down the depth chart, what do they have? There are very few teams in this league who can go 2-3 players deep and be very comfortable with putting those guys into the ball game. The defensive situation there too at the defensive back spot, they get safety Matt Robinson back from shoulder surgery and an injury last season. He played 3 games, but he's the leader of that secondary. So you can imagine that they'll be fired up to have him back after that team gave up tons of points last season. Again, I think it comes down to C.J. Brown and whether he's healthy. He's got some help at the wide receiver position. True freshman Stephon Diggs, who was a 5-star guy, 6'1", 190 pounds. He could have an impactful season for Maryland if he's able to contribute anywhere close to what Sammy Watkins was able to give Clemson in year number 1. All of a sudden, maybe you've got a little bit more potent Maryland offense. I mean, this is a team that has a very good defensive end. Matt Furstenberg, Clemson saw him a couple of times last season make some plays in the ball game against Maryland on the road. But all in all, I think that Maryland, as good as it can be, is going to finish either at the bottom of the Atlantic Division or just one notch up. I don't think that they're a team who finishes any higher than second from the bottom in this league. They may find a way to lose to Boston College and slip below the Eagles. And that would be a disappointing season for Maryland again. 2-10 last year, 1-7 for Randy Edsall. Hot seat after year 1, lukewarm. Next season, if they finish at the bottom of the league like I predict them to, that seat will heat up significantly for Randy Edsall. Stay with us here. More TigerNet Talk right around the corner.
Want to hear the sound of hassle-free traveling?
All aboard
Amtrak takes the hassle out of traveling to over 500 destinations. You can stretch out in a spacious seat, relax in a sleeping car, and enjoy a hot meal in the dining car. And for those who want to kick back and take in the scenery, go right ahead. For everything you get on Amtrak, the one thing you won't get is this. So whether you're going to a family reunion or an away game, make it a whole lot nicer on Amtrak. Book your trip today at Amtrak.com or call 1-800-USA-RAIL.
All aboard!
Listen, if you're considering buying hardwood flooring, don't do anything until you've written down this number and received your free Lumber Liquidators catalog.
The flooring was high quality with an unbeatable price tag.
Call in the next 10 minutes to get your free catalog.
What I bought at Lumber Liquidators is of vastly higher quality than flooring I had installed 6 years ago, and for a fraction of the cost.
So if you want great hardwood flooring at unbeatable prices, trust Lumber Liquidators. We buy direct from the mills. Call right now to get our flooring guide and catalog absolutely free. It's filled with top quality hardwood flooring, including solid hardwoods, laminates, and bamboos, and even Bellawood pre-finished flooring with a 100-year transferable warranty. The same floor Bob Vila has in his home. This free catalog is full of tips, ideas, and our flooring project list to make your buying decisions easy. Hurry, call right now to get a copy of this free guide and catalog. Call 877-238-6302 to get your free copy now. 877-238-6302. 877-238-6302.
Hate the thought of shopping? All that hassle and can't find what you're looking for anyway? We understand. Retail stores make it difficult. Instead, try www.edistooutdoors.com. Edisto Outdoors features performance apparel and gear engineered for performance, comfort, and style. EdistoOutdoors.com. You'll enjoy the shopping and you'll enjoy the products. Great products from people who care.
Hey there, Clemson Tiger fans. If you're interested in advertising with Clemson Podcasts, go to ClemsonPodcasts.com and click on the advertising link. And as always, go Tigers!
Remember all the stories growing up as a kid about refrigerator Perry and just how hard he hit. And my mama told me homecoming games are the best on the banks of those late.
Welcome back into TigerNet Talk. I saw we had some trouble in the chat room, so I logged out and came back in. Hopefully that fixed everything for everybody. I appreciate you all being with us here on the program. Hashtag TN Talk on Twitter. Hashtag TN Talk on Twitter is the way you could take part with us on the program live. You can also chat with us in vocal in the chat room, or better yet, come on in and ask us a question. We'd love to talk with you about the Atlantic Coast Conference, your thoughts on our rankings so far. We've given you Boston College at the bottom of the Atlantic Division, followed by Maryland. So that is number 5 and 6 in the league. Coming in at number 4 in the Atlantic Division, I've got the Wake Forest Demon Deacons. Al Grove, you got to give this guy a lot of credit for the job he's done at Wake Forest, winning not just the division, but the entire conference at Wake Forest. That's an unbelievable statement that was made not in the not too distant past. I mean, it hasn't been that long ago Wake Forest won the Atlantic Coast Conference. Last season they go 6-7, 5-3. This is a team who throughout the 80s was right there with Duke as far as being at the basement of the Atlantic Coast Conference, but they've had good quarterback play throughout the years. You think about the Riley Skinner years and how good Riley Skinner was for that program, and really I think evolving that program to some degree in the minds of those people who follow college sports to say, hey, you know what, maybe you can be fairly successful at Wake Forest. You run a little bit of misdirection, you keep people very honest, you don't hurt yourself with turnovers and silly plays, and all of a sudden maybe you make some special teams plays as well, have a good solid kicking core, and what do you know, you're winning some ball games against very favorable competition. And I think that was how how Al Grove got the job done there at Wake Forest. Now, all in all, Tanner Price, he's a steady left-handed quarterback for this ball club. Last season as a sophomore, he threw for more than 3,000 yards. A lot of people say he could be one of the top quarterbacks in this league. And this is a league that returns, I believe, 10 out of the 12 quarterbacks in the entire conference. And everybody that's coming back this year has some significant playing time under their belt. So that's a real That's a real important issue for every team when you come into the season. You want to have your number one guy, your leader, to have some experience, and pretty much every team in this league has that right now. Some because of injury last season, getting those guys in, but others because you've got these guys back for another year, and some are going to be coming back for a third time. So you saw last season a year where you had a bunch of young quarterbacks like Tanner Price, like Taj Boyd, those guys who got in the mix, got thrown into the fire, and now all of a sudden you look a year later, that could be one of the strengths of this conference is the quarterback position. Josh Harris had an up and down career for the Demon Deacons. He had an injury-plagued season last year back in 2011. Barely got over 400 yards last season. He's going to be the key to this Wake Forest offense and their success. They got to replace their two of their top three receivers. Their biggest loss was Chris Givens, school record 1,330 yards last season. Look for a kid named Terrence Davis to have a big year and step up. They've also got a couple of big sophomores in Matt James and Brandon Terry. I'm a big fan of big wide receivers. When you look at this Clemson team this year, I really hope that we can see guys like Sharon Peak and Martavis Bryant step up. Those big wide receivers begin to make plays. You think back to the Kevin Youngbloods, the Rod Gardners of the Clemson legacy and history of the wide receiving corps. That's one thing they had was a lot of size and a lot of strength. And I think those two guys, and maybe more so, they might have a little bit of speed in Martavis Bryant's case. But if you can get a guy with some big hands, reminiscent of, I know you Clemson fans aren't going to like to hear the name, Alshon Jeffrey, but a kid who just can go up when the quarterback has to make a risky throw, somebody who can go up and bring the ball down with their big mitts. That's kind of what Matt James and Brandon Terry will add to the equation for a team like Wake Forest. Defensively, they should be steady, and that's the way they play. They play smart, heady football. They've got some big questions, though, at the defensive end position. Their secondary should be solid, as always. And Grobe, you can expect, will dial up the blitz at any time to try and cause a little bit of havoc. Now, coming in at number 3, will it be Florida State? Will it be Clemson? Will it be NC State? You got it. It's the Wolfpack. 17 wins, though, in the past 2 seasons for this ball club. Tom O'Brien, last year I had him on the hot seat. Thought this guy was going to be out, even though they had a decent 2010 campaign. 2011 was a good year for them. 8-5, 4-4 in conference. Not exactly exciting. But this season, they don't play Virginia Tech, and they don't play Georgia Tech. They've got a couple of tough ball games, but not many. They open the season August 31st in Atlanta, the day before Clemson and Auburn. They take on Tennessee. They play at Miami, which we know is a road game, but not so tough. Miami doesn't exactly fill up the venue there. You've got a home contest against Florida State, and you could say their toughest road game is the one they play at Clemson. Now, Mike Glennon is their quarterback. Reminds me a lot of Matt Ryan. Even when you look at him with the helmet on, this guy looks a lot like Matt Ryan. Glennon threw for over 3,000 yards last season, 31 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. That's the second most touchdowns in NC State history behind, you guessed it, Phillip Rivers. He's got a lot of potential. This kid could be one of the best in America. He's got a little bit of lineage when you consider his brother. Now, his brother wasn't great, but this is a kid who stayed behind Russell Wilson for a few seasons, and then you had Tom O'Brien say, you know what, Russell, we're going to go with Glennon. We think he can be the guy. They went with him last season. It was fairly successful. They've won some bowl games. They're continuing to improve. And at the running back position, they get back Mustafa Green. Maybe Mustafa Green with some academic issues. They just hit the practice field, and Mustafa Green wasn't a part of them. They had a couple of guys that weren't available this week. But James Washington and Tony Creasy last season carried the ball 329 times for 1,279 yards. It looks like those guys will continue to share the load. I'm not sure about Mustafa Green, the product out of Irmo, South Carolina. He was a kid who was the leading rusher coming into last season, but then was injured and wasn't able to participate. So now where Mustafa Green ends up, I'm not sure. At the wide receiving position, they've got to really find somebody to prove themselves. James Washington, their running back, comes into the year as their leading most experienced wide receiver with number of catches. They got lots of fast, undersized guys. Tobias Palmer, as he develops, so will this passing attack for the NC State Wolfpack. You've got an offensive line there that's very strong. That was the staple for Tom O'Brien at Boston College. 4 returning starters, 6 guys with significant experience. And when you've got to go up against a defensive line like a Florida State in season, that's going to be key because Florida State might have the best defensive line in the country. On the defensive side of the ball, they got a very deep group on the defensive line. They could go 10 deep in their rotation. Tom O'Brien has built this team from the ground up, and they really look like they've improved. In the secondary, unbelievable. Last season, they lead all of college football, 27 interceptions. And the man who scares everybody right now is junior cornerback David Amerson. He had 13 picks last year. 4 games, David Amerson had 2 interceptions. They also have C.J. Wilson back and safeties Earl Wolf and Brandon Bishop. Their secondary play will have to step up in the absence of a very good linebacking core. But all in all, let's be honest, that defensive back situation and the rotation they have up front is huge for NC State. And this was a team who had expected to get Terrell Manning back and DJ Green at the linebacker position. But because Manning went pro early and Green suspended by the NCAA for substance abuse issues, or maybe I shouldn't say substance abuse, but issues with illegal performance enhancing, perhaps. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. Performance enhancing drugs. I believe that was what caused him to be out of the mix. Anyway, stay with us. The top 2 in the Atlantic Division right after this.
Heaven to me. I used to sneak downtown with my fake ID and watch Doug McCormick rock TDs on a Friday night.
Have you ever wondered how you could make a difference in someone's life? What if you could help hundreds or even thousands of children? You might think it impossible, but it's within your reach. Right now, today, students in the U.S. rank 32nd in world math skills. It's time for our children to catch up. And you can help. Become an owner of one of the world's fastest growing franchises, Mathnasium. Mathnasium is the leading math-only learning center in the U.S. Its only purpose is to make our kids better at math. Imagine helping hundreds, even thousands of students in your community improve in school and raise their self-esteem, all while doing something you truly love. Call us at 800-663-9549 to learn more about Mathnasium's exciting franchise opportunities. That's 800-663-9549 to learn how you can make a difference. Doing something you truly love. That's 800-663-9549. 800-663-9549.
Hate the thought of shopping? All that hassle and can't find what you're looking for anyway? We understand. Retail stores make it difficult. Instead, try www.edistooutdoors.com. Edisto Outdoors features performance apparel and gear engineered for performance, comfort, and style. EdistoOutdoors.com. You'll enjoy the shopping and you'll enjoy the products. Great products from people who care.
Hey there, Clemson Tiger fans. If you're interested in advertising with Clemson Podcasts, go to ClemsonPodcasts.com and click on the advertising link. And as always, go Tigers!
Clemson Tigers, we coming for you.
Yeah. Go forward. That's how we do it, baby. Little tailgate party. Y'all better come on. It's going down.
We about to back it on up in the parking lot. Got the beer on ice and the grill is hot. On your mark, get set, baby, ready or not. We gonna get some Tiger football.
That's what I was telling you about earlier. You gotta get your gear together. You gotta know what you're, let the wife handle the nuances and, the tailgating atmosphere, okay? She can handle the tablecloths and all that good stuff. You got to lock in on what's the meat going to be, what are the drinks going to be, what time are we setting up the dish, what time are the boys rolling up with the extra chairs to sit down in. What time? That's what we got to do. I'm not worried about the wine and the cheese. I'm worried about all the good stuff. And you need to start locking in. You don't want to be the guy that flops at the first tailgate of the season. There's nothing more disappointing than walking up to a tailgate and the guy says, well, I left the television power cord at home. Just wasn't thinking. Sleeping, asleep at the wheel. That's what you were. You were asleep at the wheel. You got to wake up. You got to get yourself focused. Get your game face on. Appreciate you being with us here on the program. Hashtag TN Talk on Twitter throughout the week, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Tweet to us. We'll read it right here on the program. I've got the Twitter monitor up and rolling. We've also got the chat room up. We'll take your questions. Give us a call, 803-450-0086. And if you say to yourself, well, I listen to you on podcast. I catch your show on the Stitcher Smart Radio application. I watch you on Vocal, or maybe I watch you on your YouTube channel, youtube.com/lswanmedia. That's ELSWANNMEDIA. I watch you there. How do I call you? How do I participate? We lay all of that out for you on ClemsonPodcast.com. And, of course, as I mentioned, that's turning into ClemsonSportsTalk.com really, really soon. But you can call us, 803-450-0086, all those things 24 hours a day. We don't limit you. I don't want the people who are riding in between Sherrall and Georgetown on business who are listening to us on their iPhone to say, well, I can't really call in and participate. No, you can. We want you to. We encourage that. We want you to take part in the program. So please do so. We would love to hear from you. And these shows during the summer, especially these ones where we're kind of predicting the conference, aren't my favorite. I don't get to be as opinionated as I would like to some degree because I'm trying to give you some of the facts so that when you go to the water cooler and your friend mentions to you about player X at school at NC State, you can say, hey, well, I heard he didn't get to practice a couple of days. Maybe he's had some academic issues. Maybe he's not playing this year. Now, I want you to know what's going on. So sometimes these don't exactly excite me. But coming down to the final two teams, will it be your Clemson Tigers, last season's Atlantic Coast Conference champions, or the Florida State Seminoles, the team who, once they came into the Atlantic Coast Conference, pretty much dominated Clemson up until a few years ago? For me, that's what it all comes down to. I'll be honest. On paper, year in and year out, almost every single season, Florida State is the better team. You can go back through the recent memory with all the many Clemson victories. Not many ball games did Clemson come into that game and people say, yep, Clemson's the favorite. Clemson's the more talented team. Clemson's had the better recruiting classes. Clemson has the better coaching staff. Clemson has the better defense. Clemson has the better offense, the better special teams play, whatever. Most of the time, that has not been the case. But for whatever reason, the past 6-7 years, Florida State has not lived up to the expectations. Now, their expectations and their level of expectation are extremely high because of how good they were in the 80s. But for me right now, I'll be honest with you, it's going to take a lot more than their great defense this season for me to put them above Clemson in the Atlantic Coast Conference Atlantic Division. I believe that they are a much more talented team this year than they were last year. They've got a lot more experience than they had last year. They've probably got, as I mentioned before, the best defensive line in the country. But Clemson has taken 5 out of 7 in the series against FSU. And E.J. Manuel has never been a quarterback that has scared me for whatever reason. The kid has all the tools. He's got all of the tools. But he just doesn't get it. He has trouble with his timing in the pocket. He can't get comfortable dropping back to pass. He's been injury prone in the past. This is a kid who has all the talent in the world, and for whatever reason, the 6 inches between his ears end up messing him up every single year. And that's why I just can't put them above Clemson right now. Clint Trickett is a very serviceable backup for him. You saw Trickett in Death Valley last season almost lead that Florida State team back. But E.J. Manuel, as great as he has been, winning multiple bowl games, the Seminoles were 9-1 in games last season when E.J. Manuel was the starting quarterback and finished the ball game. We have seen this kid play at an elite level, but he just hasn't done it against Clemson. And I don't think that this Clemson team, to be honest with you, is very scared of this Florida State team anymore. I think there was a time Clemson feared Florida State a little bit. Not so much anymore. We've got a question in the chat room. We'll get to it momentarily. Running backs on this team, senior Chris Thompson has big play ability. Back in his sophomore year, he had 3 runs of over 70-plus yards. One of those is a 90-plus yard run. This is a kid who had some issues last season. He missed 8 games with a broken back. How does he bounce back? They've also got Devontae Freeman and other unproven talent behind him. Probably their weakest position on this team is the running back spot. Florida State hasn't had a 1,000-yard rusher since Warwick Dunn back in 1996. That's a long time ago for a team that brings in talent like James Wilder and other great players. They have not had a 1,000-yard rusher since 1996. Willie Holstead, who last year everybody thought was going to be a great wide receiver for Florida State, unfortunately went down with a concussion. He was out the entire year. That seems to be a theme. We're hearing about all these players who are coming back from season-ending injuries, whether it's at NC State, whether it's at Boston College or Florida State. But Holstead's back. They've got a kid named Rashad Green. He led them in receiving yards and touchdowns last season as a true freshman. And Kevin Benjamin, he's one of those scary kids, 6'6", 242 pounds, could be a big downfield threat. And don't forget about Nick O'Leary, Jack Nicklaus's grandson, who's a great tight end, has got good hands, maybe the top tight end Florida State's had in a while. Now, the offensive line has a lot of reps, but they're inexperienced. They might start all sophomores this year, but against Notre Dame in the bowl game, they started 4 of those 5 sophomores in that game. So they've got a lot of mileage right now as young guys. The defensive line, Brandon Jenkins, Bjorn Warner, Tim Jernigan, Amp McLeod, those guys clogging the inside. And Brandon Jenkins is probably the best defensive end in college football. You add to that the freshman phenoms like Mario Edwards Jr. at defensive end and Eddie Goldman, both 5-star guys coming out of high school. You're just adding more depth there, young depth that will eventually play. They're probably the best defensive line in the country. The linebackers, not as great as Florida State's had in the past. They lost Nigel Branham, who led their team in tackles for 3 straight seasons. And they've moved Nick Moody, who's a former safety, up to play some of the outside linebacker there on the strong side. That'll give them some speed, maybe some additional coverage areas. And then at the secondary position, Xavier Rhodes is the anchor there. LaMarcus Joyner at the safety is a big hitter, got great closing speed. And Terrence Brooks might be one of the best guys they've had there on the defensive side of the ball in a while. But Greg Reed, there's the question, and our question comes to us from Harrington. He says, how does this morning's dismissal of Greg Reed affect the FSU defense's special teams? I think it's big. Maybe not so much defensively. Greg Reed was going to play for Florida State, obviously, especially in passing situations. But there are some other players on that team who could have stepped in at the defensive back position. But this has been a kid who, as far as kicking, more importantly, maybe punt returns goes, he was fearless. He made big plays. He could turn the field for that ball club. Led the nation, I believe, as a freshman in punt return yardage. And that's something you can't overstate how valuable a guy like that is to your program. How valuable it is to have a player like that who can come in and immediately take a situation where maybe you're receiving the ball at the 20-yard line and give it to you at the 50. Or better yet, maybe at your opponent's 20. Take that thing back for about 60 yards. And I think it's a great question, Harrington, and I certainly think that when you look at this Florida State team, when we talk about the linebackers and maybe the running back being the weakness, the biggest loss right now in my mind is obviously losing Greg Reed and what that means for their special teams. So I've got Florida State at number 2 And I'm going to say it. You got to come and knock the champs off. Clemson is my favorite to win the Atlantic Division this season. Let's face it. You open up with a very pivotal matchup against Auburn on the road in Atlanta, a chance to show America if you're the real deal or not. 2008, you had the same opportunity, and you got smacked in the face by Alabama. You haven't had very much luck playing in the Georgia Dome or in Atlanta for that matter. This is the opportunity here to bounce back and say, you know what, we got a real shot at something special. Florida State looms a few weeks down the road, on the road. Clemson also has home games against Georgia Tech, but an open week before they host Virginia Tech on October 20th and then South Carolina on the 24th. Those are the big matchups for me this year for Clemson. Auburn at FSU, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, and South Carolina. Clemson should be favored in every road game except for the game against Florida State. And maybe they're favored in every game at home as well. I think it's very conceivable. Clemson outscores Virginia Tech last year by some 48 points in the two ball games. That Clemson could be favored coming into that game. Clemson should be favored against the Georgia Tech team that's looking to rebound and get their running game back together after they've kind of got a little bit, I think, less than stellar running back group this season. In South Carolina, obviously has dominated Clemson for 3 straight years. But Clemson being the home team, Clemson having the high-powered offense, the expectations of that to continue, you would think Clemson might only be the underdog in one game, and that's September 22nd in Doak Campbell Stadium. Now, Taj Boyd, you know what he's done throughout his career, the way he came in and almost led a comeback against South Florida in his real first opportunity to kind of get the feeling that this was his ball club there, as Kyle Parker struggled so much a couple of years ago in the bowl game. But Boyd had a fantastic season last year. The first 8 games were phenomenal. The back half of the season, not so much. 9 interceptions, 9 touchdowns, 16 sacks in those final 6 games for Taj Boyd. Boyd put on a little weight throughout the season. That's going to be key, that Boyd continues to be mobile. I think we didn't see enough of that. Clemson obviously adjusting a little bit to add that pistol formation. That's all you saw at the spring game. Pistol formation, pistol formation. How does that help this offense running the ball between the tackles? That could be key as well. One other thing I'll add here about Taj Boyd. Does he fall into that second-year starter trend that we've seen where there's been a dip for Clemson quarterbacks? I think you can go all the way back to Will Proctor, and you've seen these guys, Cullen Harper, you've seen Kyle Parker. These guys dip just a little bit in year number 2 as the starter. Does that happen for Taj Boyd? And was the way the season finished out, as I mentioned a few weeks ago, was that more about other teams catching up with Clemson or Clemson just hitting a rough spot? You know, you get Andre Ellington back, unbelievable running back. When I saw this kid's highlights in high school, I knew he was the real deal. Everybody wasn't buying in on Andre Ellington. I've been high on this guy from the first time I saw him. You lose Mike Bellamy, former 5-star player, but I think guys like DJ Howard, who ran hard against Auburn last season, led the team in rushing in that game. I think a kid like Zach Brooks, the number 1 player out of Arkansas, he's got an opportunity to be impactful this season with that opening coming up as Bellamy's dismissed from the program. Wide receivers, need I say more? Most talented 6-deep wide receiving core in the country in my mind, and looks to be getting stronger as you talk about some of the recruits who are coming on board. This team and Coach Chad Morris have done an unbelievable job. I'd like to see, as I mentioned earlier, guys like Sharon Peak, guys like Martavis Bryant step up a little bit. Peak had only 4 receptions last season. Bryant only had 9. Those two guys got to get up in my mind, somewhere near 25 receptions each, maybe more this season, for me to feel like we got the most out of them this year that we could, because you know there's going to be a ton of targets for Watkins and Hopkins and Jerron Brown. Adam Humphries may have been the biggest surprise of all last season outside of Sammy Watkins. I mean, once you kind of knew Sammy, what he was going to do after the first few games, Adam Humphries was the real shocker for me. I mean, just the way that kid played, went after it, and was gritty. You got to have a guy like that. Teams like New England excel with guys like Adam Humphries, and that's what he's going to give Clemson. And how much of an impact can a guy like Dramon Hopper have? That's another thing, too. Now, I had a question come to me a week or so ago. Said, well, how's losing Dwayne Allen going to affect this offense? It's going to be big, but I think it's going to impact this offense more with pass protection and maybe blocking downfield. How much is a guy like Brandon Ford willing to contribute in that area and really dedicate himself? If he does dedicate himself and does, I think he can run routes as good as Dwayne Allen. He's probably got arguably as good a hands, maybe and a little bit faster than Dwayne Allen. Definitely faster. Does he have what it takes to give up his body a little bit in pass protection situations when it's necessary? Offensive line, lots of question marks there. Dalton Freeman is going to be the anchor. Tyler Shatley moves over from the defensive side of the ball to play the right guard position. So you lose a guy like Landon Walker. You fill in with Gifford Timothy. You've got players there who just don't have the experience. Brandon Thomas has to move from guard to tackle and fill in for Phillip Price, who I think is like the Iron Man for a lot of Clemson people out there. They're young. They've got a little bit of experience. They're going to go up against that Florida State defensive front pretty early in the season. That'll be a very big key, is how these guys mesh over the first couple of weeks. And let's not forget even that. Auburn's got a great defensive front as well. Isaiah Battle, Joe Gore, the two young guys, they're going to get in the mix too. So you know that this rotation, and Coach Caldwell's got to be trying to figure out, how we're going to get these pieces to all work together. It's all about being more consistent this year. The good news is, last year's bunch had experience, but they certainly didn't execute late in the season the way I think a lot of people would have hoped they would have. Now, defensively, the Tigers lose their top three players. Brandon Thompson, defensive tackle, just plugged things up in the middle. Andre Branch wreaked havoc. I'm going to miss seeing him put his hands on the backside of the backside of his hips, doing the little strut. And then Cody Sensabaugh, who really came on. Sensabaugh had a couple of drops early in the season, and you could see why he wasn't a wide receiver. But down the stretch, this kid became a lockdown corner. Malachi Goodman and Corey Crawford are proven, but behind them, the depth is limited. You got Vic Beasley, Shaq Lawson. Those guys are going to have to start, finding their way into the mix. On the inside, you lose Brandon Thompson, as I mentioned before, and Randy Moore. Guys like Deshaun Williams. He's only got 138 snaps in his career, and he's the most experienced interior lineman. Tavares Barnes, Grady Jarrett, Josh Watson. You've got a bunch of guys trying to get in there. Carlos Watkins, true freshman. Everybody liked how Carlos committed. You liked him driving the golf cart there at the game. Martin Aiken. Those guys may be relied on. We may be very young. I don't think the youth, though, I don't think the youth is a reason to say that it can't be a successful team, especially on the defensive line. I think you've got a significant amount of talent. It's how much they can develop early in the season. And that's going to be key. The linebackers should be improved. I mean, Stephon Anthony proved that he's the real deal. He said Clemson is coming. You got to believe him. Tony Stewart, if he can get back from his knee injury. Carrico Wright. If you hadn't got that memo, Carrico Hawkins changes his name to Carrico Wright. Quandon Christian, Tig Willard, a lot of the same guys back. Justin Parker's going to redshirt. Venable's system might help these guys out. A lot of these linebackers have been saying, hey, you know what, the simplicity here is helping us out a lot. You saw a lot of guys looking around last season trying to figure out what was going on. You got to stay away from that. DBs, you get 7 guys back who started last year. Sensabaugh, obviously, not in the mix. He was the best cover guy. Rashard Hall is recovering from that nagging knee injury that he had throughout the season. You could see it when he ran. He wasn't at full strength. But you've got Jonathan Meeks at the strong safety spot, lots of speed, lots of strength. Xavier Brewer, who I just love, the X-Man, at the cornerback position, and Bashad Breeland out of Allendale, South Carolina, who came on really strong last season. They've got a couple of good backups, too, in Darius Robinson and Martin Jenkins. You add Travis Blanks, true freshman, who can play that nickelback position. If Venables goes to like a 4-2-5, Blanks is easily going to be probably the most impactful freshman that Clemson has this year in my mind. All in all, you weigh it out. I think the Seminoles have to take it from Clemson. The thing that Florida State's got to like about their chances, though, is that they have Clemson coming into Doak Campbell Stadium. Final segment, we'll be back to talk a little bit about recruiting and send you on your way. 49 minutes into the show. I told you we'd go over. Heart of a champion is what Clemson's got to have, and Florida State's got to take it from us if they want to win the Atlantic Coast Conference. Stay with us.
Have you ever wondered how you could make a difference in someone's life? What if you could help hundreds or even thousands of children? You might think it impossible, but it's within your reach. Right now, today, students in the U.S. rank 32nd in world math skills. It's time for our children to catch up. And you can help. Become an owner of one of the world's fastest growing franchises, Mathnasium. Mathnasium is the leading math-only learning center in the U.S. Its only purpose is to make our kids better at math. Imagine helping hundreds, even thousands of students in your community improve in school and raise their self-esteem, all while doing something you truly love. Call us at 800-663-9549 to learn more about Mathnasium's exciting franchise opportunities. That's 800-663-9549 to learn how you can make a difference. Doing something you truly love. That's 800-663-9549. 800-663-9549.
Hate the thought of shopping? All that hassle and can't find what you're looking for anyway? We understand. Retail stores make it difficult. Instead, try www.edistooutdoors.com. Edisto Outdoors features performance apparel and gear engineered for performance, comfort, and style. EdistoOutdoors.com. You'll enjoy the shopping and you'll enjoy the products. Great products from people who care.
Hey there, Clemson Tiger fans. If you're interested in advertising with Clemson Podcasts, go to ClemsonPodcasts.com and click on the advertising link. And as always, go Tigers!
Listen, if you're considering buying hardwood flooring, don't do anything until you've written down this number and received your free Lumber Liquidators catalog.
The flooring with high quality with an unbeatable price tag.
Call in the next 10 minutes to get your free catalog.
What I bought at Lumber Liquidators is a vastly higher quality than flooring I had installed 6 years ago, and for a fraction of the cost.
So if you want great hardwood flooring at unbeatable prices, trust Lumber Liquidators. We buy direct from the mills. Call right now to get our flooring guide and catalog absolutely free. It's filled with top quality hardwood flooring, including solid hardwoods, laminates, and bamboos, and even Bellawood pre-finished flooring with a 100-year transferable warranty. The same floor Bob Vila has in his home. This free catalog is full of tips, ideas, and our flooring project list to make your buying decisions easy. Hurry, call right now to get a copy of this free guide and catalog. Call 877-238-6302 to get your free copy now. 877-238-6302. 877-238-6302.
Hashtag T and Talk. You're listening to TigerNet Talk. I'm your host, Lawton Swan. Glad to be with you here. Wednesdays, 10 p.m. That's how you can take part in the show with us on Vocal, VOKLE.com. You'll see us on the front page, L Swan Media, trying to move up the charts. We can't do it without you. We certainly appreciate everybody tuning in, folks in the chat room, spending time with us, everybody who's participating with us. It's a little bit different. You kind of got to click to log in and be able to chat, but some of you guys will figure it out. And as football season rolls around, we'll take more of your interaction, calls, tweets, emails, and more, whatever. 803-450-0086. Got a couple of minutes here to get you out. Recruiting notes. Vernon Hargraves, ESPN number 4 overall recruit in the country, number 1 cornerback in the country, had come down to Clemson in Florida. We talked just a week or so ago about how a couple of guys were down to, and there's still some out there. It's Clemson and somebody else, whether it's Clemson, Florida, Clemson, Virginia Tech, Clemson, Auburn. Just to have Clemson in the mix with all these guys feels good. But Hargraves selects Florida. And these are obviously verbal commits. Kendall Fuller, Rivals number 3 overall prospect, number 1 cornerback in the country according to them, down to Clemson, Virginia Tech. Family ties lead him to Virginia Tech. That leaves a lot of Clemson people's thoughts on a kid named Mackenzie Alexander. He's a 4-star guy. He's a top 10 corner in the country. His brother, McEnroe Alexander, committed to Florida State this week, and that got people in a tizzy because they saw Alexander commits to FSU. Wrong, Alexander. Mackenzie's still looking, and perhaps his home could be Clemson. But I got a feeling, man, when you think about his brother going there, it's going to be tough, a tough sell. But this week, Clemson did pick up Mike Williams, 4-star wide receiver, 6'5", 205-pounder. That's Clemson's 16th commitment this season. You add him in with Demarcus Robinson and Ryan Jenkins, you got a great wide receiving core. But don't be surprised if Clemson oversigns and takes a kid like Marquez North if they can. You still got Montravius Adams out there, Tyrone Crowder. You've got Austin Droogsma. Those are the 4 guys right now I think Clemson people are really focusing on. You've got an entire season to go. You never know how these things are going to bear out, but it's definitely looking good right now. Clemson continues to be one of the bigger players out there on the recruiting trail. My hat goes off to Dabo Sweeney and this entire staff because they've just done an unbelievable job. And Jeff Scott really leads the way for this recruiting staff, and it's a fantastic position they put themselves in. And when you look at 2014, that class looks good. Add to that maybe a kid like Raekwon McMillan, who's one of the top linebackers in the country, could be one of the top recruits next season as well. He's got Clemson in his top 3. He said he had a great chance to speak with Brent Venables, talking about the number of players he put into the NFL. And finally, we'll get you out of here on the fact that best news that I've heard all week, I think maybe Daniel Rodriguez is cleared to play for the Clemson Tigers. Rodriguez has a Purple Heart. He's a former veteran over in Afghanistan. This guy just deserved everything that he's getting right now. He clearly deserves it. And I think the NCAA and the Atlantic Coast Conference did the right thing in allowing this guy to come on to Clemson's program. Clemson's better for having a guy like Daniel Rodriguez on their team. These young men will learn a lot from a guy who's got serious combat experience. And I think that, when you talk about building your program, look, you can think of other teams that have had guys like this on there. This is the first time I remember Clemson having somebody like this on their team. He'll be wearing number 83 for your Clemson Tigers. So go out and scarf up all those old Dwayne Allen jerseys, because I know that's going to be a guy in Rodriguez you can certainly be proud of to be a Clemson Tiger throughout the duration of his career as a walk-on for Clemson. That's all the time we've got for you for today. 56 minutes, show's in the can. We'll be back next week, 10 p.m., Wednesday evening. Look forward to talking with you about your Clemson Tigers. Till next time, as always, y'all take care now, and go Tigers!